Welcome everyone, I'm Kristen Daly. I'm the Executive Director of Global Washington, your host for this evening. And for those of you that don't know, Global Washington is a network of 165 organizations that have a presence in Washington State and work to improve lives in developing countries. So the majority of our members are nonprofits, but we also have for-profits, academic institutions, and foundations. So we are very proud that UNICEF USA is one of our members and that we can have events like this to raise the profile of UNICEF and have you all gather here to learn more. Come on in. Global Washington has events throughout the year. We usually have 3 or 4 events per month. So on different topics, everything from climate change to economic development to issues that we're going to hear tonight. So if you're interested in learning more about the broader issues of global development, please sign up for our newsletter and get more involved. We have an annual conference on December 5th this year that draws about 450 people with keynote speakers from around the world. And you're all welcome to attend, and we'll be sending out information and registration information about that shortly. So, without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing Caryl. And I know she's only in Seattle for a short time, so I feel so lucky to have just an hour with her, and I get to have this intimate conversation with you all listening. So, Caryl has been the president and CEO at UNICEF USA for 12 years. And her bio is printed in your program, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. But a couple of things that I love from her bio is the statement that she has dedicated her life career for advocating and helping those less fortunate. Not many of us can say that about our life career, and making sure that she is raising the voices of others that have no voice. So. Very honored to have you here. Also, Caryl's traveled to more than 30 countries and really gets to know the programs that she's supporting and hears the stories of the people that she is there to help. She's specifically looked at emergency relief and the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, the 2011 East Africa drought, the Ebola and Zika outbreaks, and the ongoing refugee crisis and mass migration that we're going to focus on today. The other thing I love about her bio is she's won numerous awards, but my favorite award is the award of 25 Moms We Love from Working Mothers magazine. So I would be a rock star in my house if I had that title. So.
My kids didn't vote.
Oh, that's fantastic. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you.
So we're going to have a conversation, then we're going to save plenty of time for questions from you all too. So we'll do that in about 25 minutes. So first, Caryl, as I mentioned, you've traveled the world and really seen a lot of the refugee crisis and mass migration firsthand. But I also heard that you have a personal story that really fuels your work in this topic. So I'd love for you to share your personal connection and really talk to us also about, from your personal standpoint and looking at this issue, why is this so important in this moment in our history?
Wow. In 2 minutes, right?
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes, okay.
About 5.
So the personal story first, you know, I usually describe it by saying that there's this picture in my head that stays with me, and it really does. It stays with me with everything that I do. And it is a real photograph, and it's a picture of a little girl who is 6 years old, and she's holding the hand of a little boy, and he's 4 years old, and they're getting ready to board a ship. And they've only learned 24 hours before that they're going to board this ship. And they're bound for a country that speaks a language that neither of them speak. And because they're so young, they can't even find the country on the map, because only one of them has even started school at that point. And they're traveling without their mother or their father, but with a woman whose last name they know, she was Frau something, but whose first name they will never know because they will never see her again. And the little girl in the picture is my mother. The little boy is her brother, and their parents had to make this very heart-wrenching decision to send their children away because They're living in Vienna, and the Nazis have arrived, and the only way they could ensure the lives of their children was to put them on a ship. So they did that thinking it would only be a matter of weeks until they would see them again. For my mother and her mother, it was 10 years before they were reunited. They came to this country, my mother and her brother. They were raised in an orphanage on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. But my mother would tell us that story, and she would tell us about this woman, this one person who saved her life, who she never saw again. And she really taught us at a very, very young age that one person can make a difference, and that I wouldn't exist if not for the generosity of a woman she never saw again. But simultaneous to that, my grandfather also boarded a ship, and he was bound for Cuba on a ship called the SS St. Louis. It's often called the Voyage of the Damned. It had 954 passengers, most of them Jews or sympathizers with Jews, and they had paid dearly. My grandfather owned lumber yards. He sold everything he had to buy passage on this ship, and he was going to get to Cuba, send for his children who were in the orphanage in the United States, send for his wife who was in hiding in Austria, and start life again. And they celebrated all across the ocean until they got to Cuba, where when they went to get off the ship, they learned that these documents they had purchased so dearly were all fraudulent. And Cuba wasn't going to let them in. And so they sat in a harbor for 40 days while the world debated their fate. And even the United States would not take them, and they were sent back to Europe, where most did perish at the hands of the Nazis. But my grandfather was amongst a very few who were let off in London. He used to say it was his charm. We think he was rowdy, but he got let off the boat in London, where they were immediately put into a prisoner of war camp because they were Austrians. And he literally survived the war because he was in a prisoner of war camp. So I knew my grandfather. So while my mother was telling us all about this, one person can make a difference, my grandfather was telling us what happens when the world turns its back, when nobody gives a damn. And I'm watching a world right now with over 50 million kids on the move. 29 million of them forcibly removed from their homes right now, sleeping on rocks tonight instead of beds. And I can't help but think about that. That was my mom. You know, she was forcibly removed from her home. And I can't help but think about the question that my grandfather would pose to me as a child of where was the world? And so I look at what's going on around us. I look at our own country and our own borders. I've been in Bangladesh this year with the Rohingya. I've been in Jordan with the Syrian refugees. And I can't quite comprehend that we haven't learned better yet.
That's a powerful story in the sense of our responsibility and why the world is turning our back, but also thinking about that one individual that can make a difference. Can you continue to tell us your stories? You said you spent some time in refugee camps around the world, and we know that many times in the mass migration and refugees, they end up in refugee camps. So can you tell us more about those individuals, about their stories and why they fled?
So, the first camp I ever went to was Darfur, and that was many years ago. But let me just go from the past couple of years. You know, I've spent a lot of time in Jordan in the Zaatari camp, and I remember when I first started going when the camp was tents. I mean, it's a city now. I mean, it's the people live in what are, we call them containers. They're like little metal trailers almost. But when I first started to go, it was tents, and the camp was never intended to be the size it is. It's, you know, just huge now. But talking to a man who was still in a tent at the time, and there weren't yet street lights or anything. Now there is a complete water system in the camp. There's even a water treatment plant, and where we're taking the dirty water from the camp, converting it to gray water, and giving it to the farmers in the region, so that there will not be refugee envy, if you can believe it, but there is refugee envy because they get services. But in any case, I remember talking to this one man who was in the camp, and he was trying to get me to understand what his life had been before. So he was an attorney who took on the case of defending people who were protesting in Syria. And at a certain point in this case, he was approached by others to stop what he was doing and not defend the protesters. And he chose not to, so they bombed his house. And his wife died in the bombing. And his daughter was injured, so he took her to the hospital who would not treat her because of who he was. And he literally took a 13-year-old daughter and put her on his shoulder and carried her walking into Jordan. And when he got to Jordan, he found himself in this camp with no money, everything he owned formerly in Syria gone. And he was trying to get me to understand it, and he kept saying to me, I was a lawyer. He said to me, we had a house, we had cars. And I can't do it because I have a mic in my hand, but he kept slapping his hands. He kept saying, I had a house, I had a car. He said, my children had laptops. My children had laptops, Caryl. Like, he kept trying to get me to understand that his life was no different than mine before this started. Like, truly that there but for the grace of God go I moment for me. And now he said, I'm living in a tent. There are 9 of us in the tent. My 13-year-old daughter, there are no lights in the camp, so I won't let her go out of the tent once it gets dark. So she needs to urinate. He goes, she's forced to urinate in the corner of the tent in front of 9 people. And he said, and she's 13. And it was just, the indignity of that even was so horrific for him. And everyone I talked to in the camp has a story. Everyone can tell you what life was and what life is. And given the choice, everyone in the camp wants to go home. You know, when you say, what do you want? They want to go home. They want to go home to the home that they knew, not the home that is now. They want to remember Syria when she was grand. They want to remember feeling safe in Syria. They want to go back and have a life. I'll move that now to the Rohingya. I would say the thing that struck me the most about the Rohingya camp in Cox's Bazar, where I worked this past year, first of all, it's a beautiful camp. It's the most organized camp I've ever seen, and it went up in, I think, 6 weeks total. They built that camp. And as sad as it is to say, unfortunately, we've gotten really good at building refugee camps because we're doing it so often, and I think that's what struck me the most. And then also there's a certain Asian sensibility to the camp that makes it not an ugly place. I just don't know how to explain that, but there is some sense of order to this camp. And the difference that I saw in the Rohingya is, I always go in the camps, the first things I start asking people is, you know, what do you need, what do you want? When I go home to the US, what do you need, what do you want me to tell people? And I've grown very accustomed in my 13 years with UNICEF to hearing, you know, we need food, we need water, we need shelter, we need homes. I want my children to get an education. Those are the things that I usually hear. In the Rohingya camp, to a T, everyone I asked said, we want justice. We want the world to know our story, and we want justice. We've done nothing. And I was really struck by that. And I heard probably from you one of the most horrific stories in that camp. You know, and I really try hard to talk to people in the camps and to really hear their stories, because I think it's important to tell their stories, for you to know their stories, because these are people, they're not numbers, and it's easy for them to become numbers for all of us. Oh, that's a great sound. I saw that baby sneaking here. You know, and if the baby really needs to be held, you can pass. Great grandma, don't worry. Anyway, but in the Rohingya camp, I was talking to a woman, and she had her 2 kids by her side and a little one in her arms, and I asked her to tell me her story, you know, and I just randomly picked her out. And we have what's called child-friendly spaces, and it's a place where UNICEF staff work, and kids can be kids. We sing, we dance, we draw pictures, but we also use that as a place to identify psychosocial needs, which are the kids that really need help, and to try to get them the help that they need. So, and it's a place where the kids can be while their parents are trying to figure out the rest of life. And so I just randomly picked out a woman, and I said, so tell me, how'd you end up here? And she told me her story. The family had gone out for a picnic, so they were not in the village. And they came back, and the village was gone. It had been burned, and she lost a child in the fire. So they grabbed whatever was left and they ran into the woods, and they hid in the woods for, she thinks, 3 weeks. She wasn't sure on that. And she said to me, some days we ate, some days we didn't, depending on what we could find in the woods. And they finally decided that it was never going to be safe to return to the village, so that they would walk to Bangladesh. And she said it took altogether 7 days from where they were to get to Bangladesh. But somewhere around the 4th or 5th day, her baby died. And she said to me, up until that point, she told me this story like stoically is the only way I could describe it to you. She just kind of told me a story, like she was almost talking about somebody else. And then she said, my baby died. And at that point she started to cry, and she said, and the worst part of it is, I had to bury my child on the side of a road that I don't know where is, that I will never find again. She said, what more can they take from me? And then you sit there and you listen to that and you don't have an answer. What more could they possibly take from this woman? And now she's in a camp, and she said she's happy to be in the camp. She can sleep. There aren't bullets whizzing by. She doesn't have to worry they're going to burn her village down. Her children are finally sleeping through a night, not terrified. But they have no future. They have no state. They don't, nobody wants them. I mean, this is the SS St. Louis all over again. And then I go to our border. And you know, I won't touch immigration law. I'm not a legislator. It's not my job. Higher pay grade than mine to figure that out. But I will tell you that it is immoral for children to be victimized by the politics of adults. And we are using our children, and that's wrong. And I really feel like we have got to separate how we treat children from whatever legislation we decide is appropriate for the country. And I've heard stories that echo the two that I've told you, of the harrowing things that they left behind in their countries of origin, and to them, you know, to moms whose children were taken from them, to children who were taken from their moms. I've sat in immigration hearings with the kids who have no lawyers, and I don't know where I am.
These stories are so important for you to retell and retell again so that more people know. So thank you for doing that. Can you expand a bit on these stories, because now we know the people there. Can you expand and talk a little bit more about UNICEF's work, what you're doing, the child-friendly places in particular sound fantastic for a space, but what else? What else is UNICEF doing in these camps or to address these issues?
So for whatever reason, you know, UNICEF, bottom line, we do whatever it takes to save a child anywhere in the world, as well as to ensure that the child is not just saved, but that the child will thrive. And we really do believe in a comprehensive approach, because you don't want to just save a child from polio and then have them never get an education or not have water or not have food. So it's a very comprehensive, you know, whole child approach. In the camps, for some reason though, we are the plumbers of the UN. And I really can't tell you why UNICEF is the plumbers, but we are the plumbers. So we do the water and sanitation. UNHCR clearly runs the camp, sets up the camp, establishes the structure, and is the governing board of the camp. But we are responsible for the plumbing, and we are responsible for the children. And so that means if there are schools to be set up, we're setting up the schools. We are creating, again, the child-friendly space. We're providing the psychosocial. We will do sport for development in the camp. We will do also a lot of the educational programming that goes beyond just formal education. You know, we will do health education, you know, teaching women to breastfeed their babies. We will be part of the nutrition response, giving out micronutrients as well as just whatever other sustenance and program delivery there is. So on different camps, different days, different things, but pretty much I always say it's kind of D, all of the above, for whatever children need.
That's great, and it's so interesting. I don't think I've thought so much about a child going to school or getting an education in a refugee camp. It seems these camps are becoming more and more permanent in some children's lives, but Are you working in partnership with anyone on kind of the education delivery? We're in Seattle, and this is our tech town, and I know there's definitely companies and others really looking at some innovative technologies in camps. Are you working on any of those innovative technologies with them?
We are. We're working actually right now. We have something called Generation Unlimited, which is all about the fact that children, we've done a pretty good job till now. There's still a lot more to do, so don't miss that pretty good job on getting, children through into elementary education. But we've not done a really good job on getting them past that, or to offer opportunities that will at least bring them a livelihood and a life. And right now we're losing an entire generation. Again, over 50 million kids on the move, they're not in school. And so we are losing them, and if you think we have security and issues today, wait 10 years. Because these are people who are not getting educated, not getting job skills, not having mentors, not having opportunities, and we're gonna have to figure out what we do with all these people in 10 years. So one of our challenges is you go to a camp and you might be there for, if you're lucky, a year or two, as opposed to, the Darfur camp is still there. And you hope to go home, but you have no credential to go home with. So we are working with Microsoft actually on something called an education passport, which will allow you to take the education you would have gotten in your homeland and have it credentialized through this program, and it will be like a passport. It will go with you so that you can maintain your education, complete your education, and go back. And it's actually a very exciting project.
That sounds so great. I mean, again, it's hard to think about a transient life within these camps and what's next, and that just gives so much hope. It's such a path forward. So.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a really great quote. It's a Thomas Jefferson quote, and I'll bastardize it, I'm sure, but it's something to the effect of, if we solve all the problems of the world, but we fail to solve the problems of education, then our children will destroy whatever we bequeath them. But if we solve only the problems of education, our children will solve the problems of the world. And I believe that is what Generation Unlimited is all about. I wish I could tell you that my generation solved the problems. I'm one of the oldest people in this room. I truly apologize to all of you for what we're leaving you, but I have great hopes that the next generation is going to do a better job.
So great. So I have one last question, and then we'll open it up for questions from you all. The stories you told were hard to hear, and when we open the newspaper and we read the stories, it's often that people become dismayed, and there's compassion fatigue. Have you figured out a way to break through that compassion fatigue and get people's attention and motivate people to act?
It's really hard, and it's interesting. I watched, the Ice Bucket Challenge, and I thought, okay, I actually put my staff in the room and said, now what didn't we think about, and you better come up with a better one. But it's really hard. The emergencies, in prior years, you'd have what the UN ranks emergencies, level 3 being the highest, 2 and 1s. And in any given year, you might have 1, 2, max, I think 3 level 3 emergencies occur. We have that constantly right now. The level of emergency is at that level, and so as the public is become desensitized to it, and it takes a picture on that front top fold of the New York Times of a baby washing up on shore to get the American public to realize children are dying. And I can tell you that the Times got as many letters condemning them for printing that picture as they did applauding them for printing that picture. As a matter of fact, I think they even had more condemning them. And so it's kind of like, it's okay that it's happening, we just don't want to look at it. So I have to ride this fine line with the public of, you don't want to see it, I need you to see it. How do I present it in a way that you will be compelled to act? And we haven't hit a magic bullet yet, we just haven't. But I am so receptive to your ideas on this, and we will try every possible quirky, crazy thing, from things that are funny to things that are heartbreaking, to try to get your imagination to compel you to act.
I have to say, my then 4-year-old daughter had the Kid Power Fitbit watch that she loved, so that was a good way. It had the kids engage with stories of other kids around the world, and great for 4- and 5-year-olds, so good way to do that. And thank you all for being here, because you don't have compassion fatigue, hopefully, right now. So we're going to open it up for questions. Donnie has a microphone, so please raise your hand, and we'll come around. Any questions?
Thanks for being here. And I've seen you before. I went to DC and saw you with the Student Summit. But I would like to know, like, I'm an adult. Like, I've got a kid who's very involved and gets involved in a lot of things like this. But how do I get involved in a way that actually furthers the mission? What's the easiest entry point?
You know, a lot of that depends. There are lots of ways to get involved. I mean, obviously, one way is financial support. You can donate. I will never say no to a check, so let's just be clear on that. But there are lots of ways to get involved. And on our website, unicefusa.org, you can look and see volunteer opportunities. But right now, I think the biggest thing I'm asking of the American public on the engagement level is, we're about to have a presidential election, we're about to have midterm elections, we're about to have local elections. We demand that our candidates put forth platforms on the things that we care about. There isn't a candidate who doesn't have a platform on race, a platform on women, a platform on big business, on taxes. Isn't it time we had a platform on children? You know, Nelson Mandela said society will be judged by how we treat our children, and yet we don't ask our leaders to tell us what their issues and platform and plans are for children. And I am trying really hard right now to force a platform on children. So anybody you support, any political place you go to, anyone who's speaking, you should ask them, what's their platform on children? Because if we start asking, it will compel our leaders to have to come up with one. Because until we make it a requirement, they don't have to. And I believe if we were to ask ourselves, is this in the best interest of children, we might make decisions a little differently than we make them now. So, easy one there. Second is, when you read it in the paper, respond to it. Write the letter to the editor, write the op-ed, take advantage of a church service or a synagogue service or a mosque service to speak out, to get others to follow you, to support the people who are supporting the things you care about. I think have conversations at your dinner table. You know, you talk about your daughter, you know, I'm not surprised that Riley's following in the footsteps because it's a priority in your family, and we're not going to raise a generation that's going to do a better job if we don't instill in that. My mother instilled that in me, and I know she did. And all of us in our family, my generation, we are all in helping professions because we were told at such an early age, imagine if you could be that person. You know, and it was held up as such an honor to be that person. We can do that. And then you can do what you do best. If you're a writer, you write about it. If you're a painter, you paint about it. If you're a teacher, you talk about it in your classroom. If you're a corporation executive, make your decisions by asking, what does this decision mean for children? And decide accordingly.
Mea culpa, I follow her.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you again for your time tonight. One of the things that you brought up too really struck something I've been thinking about as well, having to do with the children in the camps and the war zones and what kind of future they're going to have. And one of the interesting things that I've actually, when I was in grad school, I actually met a Syrian refugee who was taking classes at UW. He was anti-government, but I'm also a friend of a friend who I have on Facebook. He's pro-government, and I saw him posting. So my question is, in places like Syria, Iraq, on and on and on, like all the different war zones, do you think reconciliation is possible with children growing up in that kind of environment, or is this going to be some sort of long-term cyclical effect that's, you know, what we're facing now, we're going to see in the future?
So, you know, I'm an optimist, so I'd like to believe reconciliation is possible. Do I think I'm going to see it in my lifetime? No, I don't. I think that I look at just the divisiveness in a country that isn't currently at war, our own. And we're not, you know, as resource short, we're not as economically depressed, we're not, you know, the opportunities are greater. So you overlay all of that on top of an already existing battle, and I find it hard to see how we're going to get out of it. I see the value of life getting lessened, and so people are less threatened by the war that exists within their country. But I haven't given up on the kids, and I do think if we don't educate these children, we are going to see it get worse before it gets better. I wanted to add one footnote to how you get involved, because there's one thing coming up in December that you can all do. On December 7th, we're participating in what's called the Great Sleepout. It is a program that we're doing in partnership with the Great Sleepout, and 50% of the proceeds of the Great Sleepout will be going to children on the move. The other 50% you have the right to either give to us anyway, or to designate to a local charity, and there were a number of charities on there, but it has to deal with homelessness, and we're asking on December 7th that you don't sleep in your bed that night, and that you get sponsors. Now in New York, we will have 1,500 people sleeping in Times Square. In Chicago, they are going to have something like 1,500 people in Lincoln Park. But you can do this as a do-it-yourself. Sleep in your backyard, sleep in your basement, sleep in your house of worship, organize others, and you treat it like a walkathon, and you get sponsors. And as I said, it's going to go live on June 20th, I think, is the big announcement, and then there'll be a do-it-yourself toolkit, and we're asking you to think about the networks of people you know and engage them in sleeping out that night, and doing it as a fundraiser across the country. So that was my one footnote. I just didn't want to forget to say that before I left today. You know, again, I'm not totally pessimistic, because, and when we wrap up, I'll share a story with you that'll prove my point, but I'm with kids all the time, and kids are amazing. And they don't yet know the politics. So when I'm with them, I really can believe there's hope.
Other questions?
Oh, thank you so much also for coming, but I'm a part of the UNICEF club in my high school, and so one of the main things we like to do, we want to have more people to join our club, but unfortunately the majority of our school don't really understand like what UNICEF is about, and they can't really relate to UNICEF and the stories, because their lifestyle is so different. And so I was wondering, what can we really tell them to make them understand the whole
Which high school?
Roosevelt High
She
School.
was one of mine.
First of all, thank you for being part of the work that we do, and I think you have to think a little bit about what made you decide to get involved, you know, and to find like-minded people and to grow it from there. One of the reasons we are partnering with the Sleep Out is that most people in America, when they think homelessness, they think of domestic homelessness, people who have financed out or for other mental illness reasons or drug reasons or a variety of reasons are no longer in the homes that they started in or didn't have access to a home. But they don't think in terms of people who have been forced out of their homes. And we are trying to change that paradigm. And so by joining forces, we will support those who are traditionally homeless, and they will support children on the move, and we will educate each other. And I think that's part of how our campus clubs and our UNICEF Unite, you know, that's why I love the shirt you're wearing, which is really all about letting local communities decide what they want to advocate on. And I think if you were to look at what's happening in the Seattle area that has impact on children that your club could get involved in, because it's not just about kids over there. When you look at the United States and compare our under 5 child mortality rates, or other rates that children get measured on, we don't hold up too well. So there's a lot of work to do here as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for being here. I have a question about internal displacement children. So
we know that children, when they cross the border, they register in a refugee camp. They start getting help from international organizations. But how about children that being displaced within the country? They have to move from place to place, and there's not even a camp, for example, in Syria right now. So how do we locate them and help them? How do we keep track of how many children is being displaced within the country?
So we are working still in Syria. We do have UNICEF staff in Syria, and my most recent trip was to the Central African Republic, where there are about 500,000 kids right now who are internally displaced, and there are camps inside the country. But it's hard. It's especially hard in a conflict zone to keep track of anybody. It's doubly hard in a country where they may not have a birth registry. I can tell you the hardest thing I faced in Haiti after the earthquake is we didn't know how many kids there were before the earthquake, so we had no idea how many kids we'd lost. And you also didn't know who belonged to who. And so you had people claiming that's my child, and the child saying, no, that's not my parent, or vice versa. So it's difficult work. It's less about the census of the numbers and more about reaching them, obviously. I know in CAR there are settlements, they're not necessarily camps. The one that I just came back from visiting, it was up in the north in the middle of the conflict zone, you know, and just to give you a sense of it, we had to literally, we were in a UN plane, we had to buzz the airstrip, which really was just a dirt road, but we had to buzz the airstrip once, you know, just to make sure that the peacekeepers could tell us it was safe to land. I mean, that's how you're really in a war zone. And we landed, and the reason this settlement is there is because the peacekeepers are there. And so they feel like they have a chance at being safe. And so this whole village has just sprung up overnight there. So we have moved our services there because there is, you know, a mass there. So we are delivering water, we're delivering food, we have set up a makeshift school, we have put a child-friendly space there. All of the things we would do in a refugee camp, we're doing in an IDP camp.
Other questions?
What are ways that we can help try to make sure people look beyond the politics and places like our border and make sure that the children are the ones that are being helped?
I think you have to put a face on it. You know, it's really easy to look at the sheer numbers of people who would like to come to our country and to really economically understand why we can't let them in, or where we don't have space, or it's just not gonna, that we need some kind of semblance of order. It's a lot different to hear about Maria and what she's facing at home. And I think that's part of it. I think also we really need to help people understand if we address the root causes in the countries that these people are fleeing from, we won't have a migration crisis. And at the same time that we're not letting people in, we continuously cut foreign aid. And so that's why I'm saying, let's ask our legislators about that platform. You know, you don't want to let them in, that's okay. But what are you doing to help them live in the life, you know, these lines in the sand are man-made. And we've all seen, we were talking before we started the session about the wall coming down in Germany, about the former Soviet Union, about, you know, the lines changed. The Central African Republic wasn't even a country when I was going to high school, you know, so we have to recognize these are man-made territories. These are children that should transcend man-made territories, and you do that by putting a face on it. You know, I'll tell you one quick thing on that. You know, I went down to Latin America the first time, I guess about 3 or 4 years ago, to look at the violence. And we talked to a lot of people and we heard a lot of stories, and it was very moving. We were in Guatemala, and I'm trying to remember what town, but I'm sorry, it's just not coming to me the name of the town, but we literally stopped, we had to find a bathroom, so we went to this church on the side of the road. It was a pretty good-sized church, because we figured they'd let us use the bathroom. And then we were in like a minibus, there were like 15 of us, so it took a while to use this one little bathroom. The rest of us started kind of wandering around the church, and there was like a rectory building, and we saw there was about 100 crosses, like standing about this tall, and on every cross were children's clothing. So we went to see what it was, and each one represented a child from that community who had died by local gang violence. And there was a picture of the child on that child's clothes. It changed my life, okay, because I read the stories. We spent the whole afternoon there. I read the stories of 100 kids who had died. And I think that that is when you begin to understand the depth and the breadth of the problem. I think when you say to most Americans they're fleeing violence, they don't understand that it is, you know, the Wild West violence. It's not violence if you choose to get involved. This is violence, no choice.
Well, I have one question maybe to throw out there, and then we can come back if there are more questions. There's been more in the news recently about what people are calling climate refugees. And I'm wondering if UNICEF has looked at that issue, again, not looking at it as a legal term, but have you seen that? Have you seen some of the stories that people are fleeing because of climate change?
Absolutely. You know, you watch the drought in the Horn of Africa, and you see how it's changing life there. So, you know, absolutely we're seeing it. Most of that region was nomadic, and when there's no rain, then there's no grass. When there's no grass, then the herd dies. When the herd dies, they are stalled in the desert. Nobody can read, nobody can write, nobody knows any other way of life. So we have embedded with the herds now and the shepherds, teachers who are literally going with them and teaching kids to read and write. Because we have got to be in a position where if that happens again, they have alternatives. So that's one thing. We are watching in Kenya where the battles have been over natural resources that are impacted dramatically by climate. And for the first time I see the climate movement and the humanitarian aid movement coming together. And I can tell you in the past month when I think about the conferences I've spoken at, you know, they've kind of broken into the humanitarian aid groups, the impact investing, because it's a really big thing in the nonprofit world right now, and we happen to be one of the few nonprofits that actually has an impact investment fund, and then it's all about climate change, you know, so I can go from, you know, the Index Ventures conference to the Earth's Call conference, you know, that we really do see these as intersecting agendas now.
That's good. I mean, breaking down those barriers for everyone, either doing the work or for the public to understand it better is beneficial for everyone.
Absolutely.
Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Garrett Moore. I work for Congressman Adam Smith. First off, thank you for your incredible work for more than a decade for UNICEF and beyond that as well. My question is, going back to Darfur, you've mentioned it a few times. You know, growing up, I got involved through activism with a number of organizations that were particularly focused on Sudan, and I'm curious to hear about this idea of the lost generation of individuals that were born or raised in camps in Chad, often because they didn't receive the education that they needed growing up. What's the difference now in that you've seen UNICEF be able to provide primary school education and beyond?
So first of all, you will find schools in the camp. Now I think, you know, when Darfur was built in particular, nobody envisioned that people would be in the camps as long as they were. I think now we assume they're going to be there for a long time. So when the camp is designed, it's designed with an education plan now. And I think that's a huge difference. You know, when I was in Darfur, it was about 10 years ago. I haven't been back in Darfur since then. And the things I remember most about it were, well, the first thing I do remember is that there was a parking lot for camels and it said Camelot, and I just thought that was hysterical. But the other thing that I remember is, you know, to get from the actual place where the plane will drop you to the camp, you drive about an hour, and you had to go through umpteen different checkpoints, and it was everything you see in the movies. You know, it was flatbed trucks with stoned unarmed teenagers and machine guns. And then it was military ones good, other ones not so good. But recognizing that it was the first time in my life I was someplace where I had to let go of what I thought was right or what I thought was wrong and just focus on why I was there. Because if it meant talking to the crazies on the flatbed in order to get food from here to there, we're gonna make friends with the flatbed. And it was a very difficult decision even at points in how far you're gonna bend. I think what I've really come to after 13 years of doing this, and it's still kind of formulating in my head, so I don't have necessarily the right words, but I'm gonna share it for what it's worth. It's the book I will write when I retire. I'm not saying that there are no evil people in the world. There are evil people in the world. But overwhelmingly, there really aren't. You know, I have met very, very few people and it's literally, I think, close to 60 countries now that I've been in my career, that I walked away saying, what a horribly evil person that is. People are standing up for what they believe that their ideology, their life experience is the right thing to do. And that you can't usually dissuade somebody in a very short term away from what they think is the right thing to do. So you have to try to find common ground on things you can collectively agree on and work from there. And it kind of speaks to your question before. I think that's doable. I just think it's a longer term solution. And when I think about the lost generation, I just know that those who will prey upon these kids have a greater immediate attraction than the long-term solution. Come join my group. Be a part of us. We will feed you. We'll give you a machine gun. You might shoot a few, you know, but we will take care of you. And that's the same mentality of the gangs in Los Angeles, you know. That is attractive. You can't, and in some cases it's also, I have no choice, I have to join that gang, you know, but it's, in CAR a couple weeks ago in Central African Republic, I went to a program that rehabilitates child soldiers. So these are the lost generation. These are the kids who come back and find their families are gone, and the rebels basically say to them, you know, the militias, you join me, or you join your dead parents. Or in some cases even worse, they say to them, you either help us or we will kill your family. And so they join. And then the rebels take care of them and clothe them and feed them and become that replacement family in a very vulnerable moment. And so when you get these kids out, I said to the group, I met a group of kids who were just starting the rehab program, and I said, well, did they give you weapons? And so evidently they give the boys machine guns. And these are turning out 13 and 14-year-olds. They give them machine guns and they give the girls knives. And I said, did you use your weapons? And one little 13, tiny little girl, she started going like this in the air. She said, yes, I did, right? And when I asked them what they thought would be the toughest part of rehab, and I kind of asked them that individually in quiet moments, they all gave me the same answer. They said, you will get us to where we won't repeat what we did, but how do we ever forgive ourselves for what we did? That's the lost generation. Because even if we educate them, can they re-enter society? I don't know. You know, some do it very successfully. If you've never read Ishmael Bea's book, you know, read it, it's phenomenal. He's a phenomenal young man. I think he's someone who has very successfully rejoined society. But he, you know, he does a lot of work with UNICEF. I've traveled with him, and he will tell you the same thing on a good day. And then there are days that are not good days. So, I don't know. You know, there is a lost generation, and I don't know what we're going to do with it.
We're getting to the end of our time, and again, you were an amazing storyteller. Thank you for telling these stories. They're going to stick with me. We are recording tonight, so if you know people who couldn't make it here, send them to our website. They can watch this event. Other things that I tell people is when you leave here today, tell 3 friends, and you get bonus points for telling somebody outside of the Seattle area, especially in the Midwest or somewhere outside. And get involved. Again, find your passion. You're already involved. Both of you are already involved in UNICEF, but for others, find out what your passion is. You know, if it's children's issues, you have UNICEF. There are other local organizations as well. So figure out what fuels your heart to make a change in the world, and set out learning more and figure out what you can do as an individual. So thank you for your stories and your hope for sure tonight. And we're gonna bring up Emily Bauer from UNICEF as well.
Just share one last story to end, because I didn't want to share it when you asked me my hope story. When I was in Zatri, you know, we work really hard and you get up really early and you work all day, and at the end of the day you're pretty exhausted and sweaty. But all day long these kids just hang on you. You know, we're the blue shirts, we're the safe folks. So you've got kids on your legs and kids on your arm and you're walking around. And then there's always kids who walk behind you who are the shy kids. And that's always the kid I really want to talk to. You know, it's that kid who won't talk to you, it's the challenge. And when I was last in Zatri, I had one of those kids walking behind me. He was about 3 years old. And with him was his 12-year-old sister, and she was carrying another sibling, a baby. And they were there at 5 in the morning when we started working, and they stayed with us all day long. And it's like 6 o'clock at night, we're wrapping up, and we realize we haven't stopped to eat all day. And so I realized also that means these 3 kids have not eaten all day. And I was kind of struck by that, because I have 3 sons. In our house, if breakfast isn't on the table by a certain hour, it's like, Mom, what's wrong? You know, so we realized, you know, that these kids are really used to not eating all day, because they hadn't complained, they'd never asked for food all day. And at one point, we were working in a tent where we were teaching women how to breastfeed, and they give the women these micronutrient biscuits so that the women can sustain their health. And they had given myself, and actually the actress Taya Leone was with me, they had given Taya, her grandmother, by the way, is one of the founders of UNICEF. So they had given Taya a biscuit, and we both were trying really hard not to eat carbs, her much more successfully than me. And so we had palmed our biscuits and kind of stuck them in our backpack. So Taya, realizing that she still had the biscuit, handed it to this little 3-year-old boy. And there were about 20 of us in blue shirts standing around, and we thought, this little kid will definitely just run off, you know, gobble this down as quick as he possibly can, you know, a treasure. And he took the biscuit and he kind of looked at it, and for the first time all day he looked me straight in the eye. And then he opened up the biscuit, and nobody said a word to this kid. And he broke it in half, and he handed half to the baby. And 20 of us just wept. I mean, it was the most pure act of humanity I have ever seen. Because this kid had nothing. I mean, he wasn't even wearing shoes, it was wintertime. But he knew enough that if he had a little, he could have a little less and the baby could have some too. And I share that because that is what gives me hope. That is what I think about on those days when I feel really defeated, when we haven't come up with the campaign, when the people don't want to get involved. You know, there's a 3-year-old who knows better. And I think if there's a 3-year-old who could give up half, just think about what we could do if we could really get ourselves to focus on it. And that is the answer to your question of, yes, I am an optimist and I do believe it will get better. Thank you very much, and now I'll give the microphone to Emily.
Please keep talking. All right. Thank you, and it is my great honor to just wrap up tonight. I'll be very brief, but once again to Caryl and Kristen, thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation. For those of you who are new tonight to UNICEF, I'm the Northwest Regional Director, and so just from a local perspective, wanted to say thank you for joining us. Thank you to Kristen and Global Washington for having us. This is such an honor to be here. Of course, to Caryl for sharing your very powerful stories. For those of you who would like to learn a little bit more about UNICEF, we have 2 staff members who are based here in Seattle. We have Megan Lynn, who's right over here, and Eric Sipe, who is in the far back. So if you would like to learn more and you're local to Seattle, please talk to them. And thank you again to everyone for being here, and to Kristen and Caryl, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.